This is Burr Sutter. Can we hear you, Don?
Hey, it's Don Shank from York, Pennsylvania.
Fantastic. All right, we're live. We're going to take a few more moments to let people come into the session. So just give us a couple more minutes, and then we'll get started with the presentation, including the live demonstrations. If you're just joining us, we'll be starting in a couple more moments. We're letting the crowd gather from the various tweets and registrations that have gone out there and the various emails, and we'll be starting our presentation in just a couple more moments. We'll be starting in about one more minute. Okay, well, let's get started. First of all, thank you all for coming today. We're going to have a great session drilling down specifically on how to make .NET work on Linux. And so there's a lot of new content that's going to be available to you right here and now. You're going to get a chance to see some very specific demonstrations. We're going to walk you through what Red Hat is doing about .NET on Linux and show you it live in this particular session. My name is Burr Sutter. You can tweet, you can hit me up on Twitter at Burr Sutter, and also I put my email address down there, burr@redhat.com, and that's a way to reach out to us if you have specific questions. We're also going to be monitoring Twitter today, so if you send out a tweet with .NET on Linux, so hashtag .NET on Linux, we'll actually intercept those and try to respond to you on Twitter as well. And always come back to Red Hat Loves .NET if you have any specific interest in what's going on in the .NET on Linux community. You'll see various how-tos, tutorials, and other content as we produce them and get them ready they'll be showing up there. Also with me today is Don Shank. Don, can you say hello?
Hello, everybody.
All right, fantastic. Don will be coming on a little bit later in the session, and Don has a number of really awesome demonstrations to walk you through specifically how .NET runs on Linux, and you guys are going to get a chance to see that. So there's Don's information, and you'll be able to follow him on Twitter as well as send him an email. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So .NET Core 1.0. So what is .NET Core 1.0? A lot of people actually haven't heard of it yet, but it's specifically Microsoft's open source project. So that's actually something to be thought about here. It is Microsoft's open source project where they've opened up .NET Core and ASP.NET and EF Core to the world at large, and they put them out there on GitHub as an example. And so I've provided a few links here to GitHub where you actually can go out there and monitor these projects yourself. You can fork them if you wish to. You can basically have your own GitHub issues associated with them, and you can actually pull the sources and modify the sources and make your own pull requests and contributions. So it is very serious open source at this point, and it also has its own .NET Foundation. So that's an element that you will want to pay attention to. Is the .NET Foundation is an organization that's funded by Microsoft and established with numerous partners, including Red Hat, to basically be the governance organization behind the .NET that's open source. So that includes the branding, that includes things like marketing, it also includes the governance model and the licensing model associated with the .NET Core. So just be aware of that, because that is a for real independent foundation, like the Linux Foundation or the Apache organization or Eclipse, another organization that will help us steward this open source within the community at large. So one thing that is a common question that I always receive is .NET, this new open source .NET, is it mono? And the answer to that is no, it's not mono. And I imagine that's a question that you've already had in your mind, and we get that question a dozen times a day, it seems like. This is not mono. However, Xamarin was recently acquired by Microsoft, and Mono is relicensed as MIT and contributed to the .NET Foundation. All of this was announced just on March 31st of this year. And so you can expect to find more Mono content and Mono collaboration within the .NET Core code base, is my expectation. So Mono is now part of the equation, even though .NET Core was wholly open sourced and built from scratch for that without the Mono influence up front. So those two worlds are now coming together nicely, and I think we as a community, open source community, are going to benefit from that tremendously. So one thing I'd want to point out here is the GitHub page from Microsoft. Again, they have numerous active projects, some of which you may have heard of before, like TypeScript, which is right there, and you can see it's got 10,000 stars and over 1,300 forks, but .NET is what we're here to focus on today, and .NET is now part of the GitHub repo. So you might have seen this very iconic image. Satya, CEO of Microsoft, with the nice image behind him there, Microsoft Heart Linux. Well, guess what? We also now love .NET. So part of the agreement we have at Microsoft that we established in November 2015 was not only were we going to make Red Hat Enterprise Linux a first-class citizen on Azure, we're at the same time making Red Hat .NET a first-class citizen on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So what this means is .NET now joins the rest of the supported web application stacks that we've supported forever here at Red Hat. We've obviously been very big in the Java community through our JBoss technologies. We've also been very big in things like PHP and Python, and even that LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP as an example. But we've also been really big in the Node.js community, as well as other web application stacks. And now .NET joins that same group of first-class citizens as being a first-class citizen on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It'll be part of our software collections, so SCL is how we refer to it, and I'll show that to you a little bit later so you can see how that's enabled specifically. But just be aware that we are all in on .NET. It is a strategic relationship we have at Microsoft, and we are working very hard right now to make it a reality for our Red Hat customers, both on-premise as well as running Red Hat Enterprise Linux at Azure in the cloud. So as of March 31st, we also made this announcement with the .NET Foundation. Red Hat joins the technical steering group. As you can also see, JetBrains and Unity have also joined. So again, we're making major commitments to the .NET Foundation and to be major contributors to this open source ecosystem. One reason we were motivated to do this is one reason, there's many reasons, but one reason that in particular that jumps out to me is the C# community has always been very voluminous and very robust. I specifically used to do a lot of C# development many years ago, doing a lot of .NET applications. I've actually put more .NET applications into production than any other technology stack that I've ever used throughout my career. And it's interesting to me personally because I had to move away from .NET when I moved into the open source ecosystem. And so I kind of stopped doing C# about a decade ago. And now it's opened back up to me again. But the C# community has always been very robust. As you can see here from the TOB index, it is in the 4th place, right behind Java, C, and C++. And you can see it's ahead of Python and JavaScript as an example. So it makes sense for Red Hat to get involved with this and really embrace that C# community and help energize that community, invigorate that community. And I think you're going to see a ton of really amazing things coming out of that .NET community over time. So the .NET family today. So there's a lot going on in the .NET universe, and I wanted to put these charts together to give you a little perspective. So one is the .NET framework that you've always known and loved, right, is distributed with Windows. It's part of Windows itself, and it is going to continue to be part of Windows. So the .NET 4 framework and everything you had there before will continue to go forward. Microsoft is not changing anything about that at this time. What's new here is the .NET Core, and that is where we're focused here at Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? So the RHEL product that we have, technology, running the .NET Core as a first-class citizen there, that's the part we're focused on. That's the new cross-platform, fully open-sourced, built for this new modern developer workflows and modern app needs. And the cool thing about it is it's distributed with your application. And if you've not used .NET Core yet, and I suspect many of you haven't, then you'll find that the usage model is very similar to what you find in the Java ecosystem and the Node.js ecosystem. Some people will say it's very much like the Node.js ecosystem, including capabilities like Grunt and Bower and Gulp as an example, which are part of the .NET Core ecosystem. So the .NET Core has wholly embraced all the open source capabilities that are available to it, and it's been refactored in several ways to basically make it enable other platforms and other open source frameworks to be attached to it. The third column here, which was announced at Microsoft Build, and I'll call this out because it is part of the overall .NET ecosystem now, is Xamarin. So Xamarin was acquired by Microsoft, and it is a cross-platform open source mono-based runtime specifically targeting iOS, OS X, and Android. So now you as a C# developer now have this full ecosystem you can work within. You can run on Linux using .NET Core, and that's what we're here to talk about today. But you can also run as a native application on iOS and Android if you want to, or even a Mac OS desktop, which is what I'm running right here today with this presentation. So just be aware of that. As a C# developer, you now have probably the greatest variety of platforms to run on than any other programming language aside from maybe JavaScript at this point. But it is key to understand that we distribute .NET Core with the application. That's a key point. Okay? And if you have any questions, by the way, do remember to use the hashtag, right, .NET on Linux, and that will be caught in our Twitter feed, and people will be answering those questions in real time. Also, there's the Q&A option that's part of this Google Hangout that you can ask those questions there, and we'll get to those in a moment. But just keep in mind that the .NET today does have these 3 stacks. They are slightly different one from another as of this moment. So for instance, on the .NET Framework side, that is still how you build your native Windows applications. If you really focused on rich client native Windows applications, the Windows Forms model, WinForms is how we used to think of it back in the day, that is still part of the .NET Framework. And it is not part of .NET Core. That's another common question I receive is, hey, can I run my native Windows apps on Linux? Is that what that means? No. We are very focused on the web application stack when it comes to .NET Core. So ASP.NET, yes, but WinForms, no, in .NET Core. So just bear that in mind. And Xamarin, of course, is focused on the mobile solutions that are out there, mobile runtime platforms. But do note that there are different class libraries for all of these guys at this moment, and that has to get unified over time. It is not there today. So the point of that is, because these class libraries are slightly different one from another, you will encounter APIs that are just a little bit different depending on what you're doing. So just bear that in mind. It is not a perfect drag and drop copy of your source code at this moment. It is a porting element you'll have to go through to make sure that your code runs within any of these 3 stacks. Okay, there will be a future .NET Standard library where they try to unify all that, and Microsoft is very committed to that. We'll be seeing that happen over time. And as of today, you will have access to 2 different tools, and actually numerous tools when it comes to .NET Core. The primary one, of course, you've always known and loved is Visual Studio. That is definitely part of the mix we have, right? So Visual Studio running on Windows as a native Windows application, building applications that target .NET Core running on Linux. And that includes Docker images running on Linux as an example. You're going to see more and more of that over time. And then Visual Studio Code, which is their brand new open source based editor. It's not a visual editor per se. It's more of a text editor, more in the traditional mindset of depending on where you come from. I used to use QEdit like 25 years ago as an example, but if you like VI or Emacs, or you like the Atom editor, or maybe you like TextMate or TextWrangler or something of that nature, or maybe you're just a Notepad++ person, Visual Studio Code would be a good place for you to go, because it's a great editor, and it runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows, so we're using it a lot, and I'll show you it running here in the background. Okay, so some details about .NET Core that we should be aware of. One is, again, it's that new open source project right out there, GitHub. It is cross-platform by default, written from the ground up to be cross-platform. It's the new unifying library and underlying CLR and framework for that. So Core CLR is the GitHub repo. CoreFX is the other GitHub repo that you want to pay attention to. There's also a new CLI. And the new CLI is actually very critical for you to get your head around, because it is exactly what you'll use to kind of get started. CLI stands for Command Line Interface. So you're going to be typing .NET often, right? So as this getting started experience matures, you're going to see .NET a lot. As of a couple months ago, there was this DNU, DNV thing, and DNX thing. Those have kind of fallen by the wayside, and they're unifying everything under .NET. So we'll show you some of that here in a second. But that'll be the tool you use for compiling, and there's also a .NET Publish to publish your application and bundle the appropriate runtime elements into your app. It should be noted, too, because of this new architecture, you can deploy numerous applications, and they're supporting CLR versions in one bundled solution into the same machine. So you can actually have one Windows machine or one Linux machine where you actually have 5 different versions of .NET bundled with its application, all running side by side. And of course, you can do that with Docker containers to help give you the Linux container protection, but you can do it even without that, which is really nice, and that's part of this new architecture. So it supports both local and Docker development. That's what that third bullet specifically means. And the Microsoft team is very focused on high performance for this runtime. They're already 2x faster than Node.js, as an example, in current benchmarks, and they intend to be many times faster than that. And they're getting contributions from the community that help them improve their performance through ASP.NET and .NET Core. So that's all occurring right now. You're going to see a very performant C# runtime, the CLR, this new .NET Core, coming to market. And they intend to be one of the best performers of any of those things. Specifically, look at the Tech Empire benchmarks and monitor that closely. You're going to see more coming from the .NET team there. One other thing they're going to be working on, and we don't have to demonstrate today, but we're working on it, is in native compilation. So if you're familiar with the Go programming language, one of its claims to fame is you can program in one language and compile natively to multiple platforms. There is no runtime per se, and .NET is also working on that aspect. Quick introduction to what's going on at ASP.NET. ASP.NET Core 1.0, and that's what it's called now, by the way. They were referring to this as ASP.NET 5, and so if you Google and you look for tutorials and other content, you're going to hear about ASP.NET 5. Kind of wipe that from your mind, or at least translate that into ASP.NET Core 1.0. And it's because it's not a 5, right? The ASP.NET Core is not a perfect upward, backwardly compatible thing from ASP, the original ASP.NET. It is something you have to kind of get your head around. It is written from the ground up on .NET Core for this new model, and it is way stronger than what you had before. As one example, one thing I specifically love is it's a single framework now for web, MVC, and APIs. In the old ASP.NET world, you actually had an MVC stack with its own underlying code base, different from the API stack. And you actually had controllers in 2 different models. So they're both controllers, right? Listen to these various HTTP verbs, whether it be get, put, post, or delete, and then respond to those either with a page or JSON, let's say. So that concept, now that they've unified all that, is incredibly valuable. And so it's one stack, and this means by the way, if you write a filter, it works across both. Right? In the old model, a filter had to be built for MVC and a filter had to be built for APIs, and you couldn't apply it universally. So that's all been unified now, and it's part of the code base that's out there. There's also this concept of middleware pipeline. So you're going to be seeing, if you're familiar with the Node.js ecosystem, they have this concept of middleware, and this is where you insert routing capabilities, and you insert other things like authentication, logging, etc. Those cross-cutting concerns in a typical application are pumped in as middleware, and they're injected, right? There's dependency injection here also. They're pumped in as middleware, and the thing to really understand about that is you don't even get an error page by default with this new lightweight framework. You have to ask for an error page. So if you, in fact, have a URL that doesn't respond with anything, you don't get anything, right, in this new model, which is pretty cool, actually. So unless you specifically enable error logging, error reporting as part of your .NET application. The last bullet here I'd like to call out is Kestrel. So Kestrel actually is the name of a very small zippy bird, is how I refer to him. And if you Google for Kestrel, you'll find it's a very attractive little guy there. But he's the high-performance embedded web server. So this is what I meant earlier when I said this new .NET world actually behaves a lot like what we're seeing out of the other ecosystems, the Node.js ecosystem and Python as well as Java, etc. And that is you embed your web server within your application logic all together, bundled together, so you have exactly the right dependencies, and you can produce that as a bundle that gets shipped out to your deployment platform. It's a high-performance embedded server. Again, they're focusing on how much faster they can be than Node.js. One of the things I think is particularly interesting as a Red Hatter is historically at Red Hat, we've normally had positions somewhere, we've had 3 of the top 5 positions on that Tech Empire benchmark with our Undertow web server, with our Vertex engine, and then Netty as an example. These are projects that we all support, and the Microsoft guys are kind of gunning for those slots. So it'll be interesting. We'll have to work with them and see which of these things actually win. It is based on the libuv. That is significant because that is the same runtime, the underlying runtime that is Node.js. So if you're familiar with the Node.js ecosystem and their big to-do, big hoopla over how much faster and performant they are, ASP.NET is based on the same exact underlying runtime, and they intend to be faster. So just keep that in mind. On the entity framework, right? So the EF framework, this is your object relational mapping technology. Again, like ASP.NET, no longer EF7 as it was referred to at one point. So if you Google and you find information that's out there, you might see EF7. It is now Entity Framework 1.0, all right? And it's a new code base. It's built on .NET Core, as we mentioned earlier, like ASP.NET is. It supports both relational and non-relational data providers with the same API. That's cool, right? So if you're going to a Mongo or one of the NoSQL technologies out there, you would use the same API as you would with, let's say, SQL Server. However, at this moment, here are the providers that are expected to come out with 1.0, and so 1.0 is not finished yet. This is not RTM, it's not GA. We're still kind of in a beta mode, RC mode with this technology. But the example providers are like your SQL Server, your SQLite Postgres. Of course, there's Redis. There's also the in-memory. Today, for demonstrations, we'll be showing you in-memory as an example. For Red Hat overall, we'll be primarily focusing on the in-memory because that's good for developers and testing, SQLite and Postgres. The SQL Server, while it's been announced it will be available on Linux, is not yet there. We'll have to monitor that closely, and we'll give you more information as we come upon it and we discover what's going on in that same category. So SQL Server, think of that as a few months down the road. We're not really focused on that today. All right, so SQLite, in-memory, Postgres is where we'll focus today. Some limitations you should be aware of, though. If you're coming from an existing .NET application that you've already created and you used EF6, some known limitations in this new entity framework, because it's not meant to be drag and drop, 100% backward compatible, right? It's built brand new for a brand new implementation. It doesn't have the same lazy loading semantics as before. It doesn't have stored procedure mapping as it did before, and the actual link translator is slightly different. So there will be some tweaks that you may have to make to your application logic so it behaves more correctly in this new world. One nice thing I'd encourage you to do if you're really into the entity relational entity framework model, if you watch the presentation from Microsoft Build, you'll see several benchmarks that were produced that demonstrate how the EF core is several times faster in many cases than the old EF6. It's a really great presentation. I encourage you to go watch it. I can tweet out that URL directly. It's up on Channel 9 today. Okay, so at this point, I want to talk to you guys about what the getting started experience is, and we'll actually show you this here in a second. You would do a yum install, right? RH.dot core 10. Just bear in mind that's what it is as of this moment. It is possible and maybe likely to change before we really ship these technologies, these bits ourselves. So right now today what we're doing is we're using a bundled nightly build, and that's part of our demonstration. So again, because it's open source, we can take advantage of nightly builds, and Don will walk you through some of the potential concerns for using a nightly build that we ran into as we were preparing for this presentation, both he and I. But just bear that in mind. You do a yum install. That's the traditional way to install anything on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And then you do an SCL enable. All right, so you got to remember the second step. If you're the first without the second, you don't have anything. And I know that's fairly confusing to people. There's a second step because anything that's a software collection has to be enabled, and you enable it, giving it the package name and bash in this case, which means open a new bash shell and giving me the .NET command line in my path. Right? You don't get it in your path by default. Then you use .NET New, .NET Restore, .NET Run. And what I'm going to do is actually demo that for you. So I'm going to come up over here. All right. And I'm going to basically, I'm going to show you my terminal. So you can see I'm running here in VirtualBox. In my VirtualBox environment, you can tell I'm running on a Mac. I have VirtualBox running over here. And actually, what I'll show you is I actually have 2 VirtualBoxes running. So let me bring that up. So the main VirtualBox manager, you can see I have 2 Red Enterprise Linux running on this machine. And that's this one right here that says Red Enterprise Linux is an image that we specifically created for you guys to get started with .NET. We'll have to provide you the URLs to where that'll be. But that is an image where you can have .NET pre-installed. And what I'll show you here is, well, let's do this real quick. SEL enable, RH, .NET Core, bash, and that makes sure it's enabled. We've already installed it. And then I can do things like .NET version here. So on this image, you can see there's the beta, the designation of that. But on this image, I have Firefox pre-installed. There's even a README. I even have VS Code right here as well. So this is a link to Visual Studio Code. And I'm just simply here in the terminal, which is the default user experience for this environment. So I'm going to just build a quick little demo. And whenever you're doing live demos, you never know what you're going to get because we are pulling live from the internet certain packages. So I'm going to say .NET new. Okay, and that's going to give me my default project. And let's just show you what those guys look like. You can see there's 3 files right there. I can open this up in Visual Studio Code. Let's say here, I'm going to come in here and say File, Open Folder, if I can remember the folder name. And let's see here. And then we'll go to root, as where I believe I put that. Oh, and I don't have permissions. So this is an example where with Linux or Unix environments, right, you got to have the appropriate permissions to read that, and I did create that in the root file system. And the user which is running as the Visual Studio Code does not have access to that. I should have remembered that. Let's see if this will work. Let's see if this will work. We're experimenting now. This is what you do with live demos. Nope, unfortunately the code command is not available on Linux. I'll have to remember that. And in the case of Windows or Mac, you can just type in code and it'll launch the Visual Studio Code for you properly. Apparently we don't have that integrated at this point on this Linux environment. Just bear that in mind. But I can always use VI, right? So VI, and there's the Hello World program right there. So if I want to change that, I could. So let me go over here to, let's put something in, save it. Okay, and the next step you do beyond .NET New is .NET Restore. Let's do a .NET Restore now, and it's going to actually pull packages from the internet down to my machine. So everything in this new .NET Core world is based on NuGet. So just get comfortable with NuGet. You can kind of see I should have the NuGet packages here locally, if I type correctly. There they are. So there's all the NuGet packages that have been downloaded from previous iterations of me running .NET on this machine. And so if there are updates to those, you'll get the updated ones as well. So just bear that in mind. Let me go back to hello over here and type in .NET run. And notice also there's a project lock JSON file now. So after you do your .NET Restore, you're going to see the project lock JSON. And let me do .NET run and let's see if this works for me. So it's doing the compilation now, and then it'll do the execution once it gets to the compilation. So hello world burr. So that pattern you see right there, .NET New, .NET Restore, .NET Run, is typically how you engage with .NET. And this is just a command line tool, but you can then use the same kind of concepts for building up web-based applications as well as for running Docker containers. I'm also running .NET here on my, in this case, it's a Vagrant box. We refer to this as the CDK, the Container Development Kit, and it's a Vagrant box with Red Enterprise Linux in it. And you can see that I'm running Docker here. Okay, and there's several things running in Docker land. Let me do my Docker images, but I have my .NET base there. So if I do .NET run, or sorry, Docker run, I get those two confused a lot. And bash, I'm going to basically run inside that environment. Let's see if this works for me. Okay, so basically I just jump in from my Red Enterprise Linux world into the .NET container now running, and you can see how fast Docker containers start, and there's the .NET command running inside there. So Don's going to walk you through all these guys in more detail. I was just trying to wet your whistle, give you a little bit of what's going on here. So at this point, let me turn this over to Don, and then I'll be prepared to answer questions on Twitter and as well as through the Q&A section on the Google Hangout. So Don, let me stop sharing and let you share.
Great. Thanks. Said that You're not running Red Hat, you're running a Mac. And could you explain how you actually are running Red Hat?
Okay, that's a very good question. So most developers out in the world at large run either a Windows machine or some form of other desktop operating system. That's an incredibly common paradigm that we see, even here at Red Hat. We've been tracking users for a number of years. Windows is still by far and away the most popular platform available to people for their developer desktop. And what I'm specifically doing on this Mac is I'm running within VirtualBox, which is a hypervisor that runs nicely on, it's also open source, that runs nicely on the Mac or Windows machine or Linux machine. You can then run Linux within that VM. So it's kind of like HyperV, but HyperV is only for Windows. In this case, VirtualBox is a really popular solution for running any form of Linux or any other operating system in a nice little window, as you saw there.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for that. So what I'm going to do is share my PowerShell screen. And again, I'm running the Red Hat Linux inside the CDK. So I actually am running Linux here. I do a .NET info. You can see, well, .NET -- info. You can see there the product version and the runtime environment. So I am running in Linux. So even though I'm using PowerShell as my shell on Windows, I've dropped down, so to speak, into a Vagrant box that's running Linux. So the first thing I want to do is the same demo that Burr did. So I'm going to do a make directory hello, pop into that, and then I'm going to do a .NET new. That creates the product, and then I'm going to do the restore, and I want you to see what happens here. You can see there's an error, unable to resolve, blah, blah, blah at the bottom. One of the things you have to remember, folks, is we're working on new stuff here. I have what I would call a stale version. For the purposes of demo, I didn't want to mess around with it at the last minute and break anything. So I have a stale version, and just in matter of time, as things are upgraded and nightly builds are done, things can break. So that just to keep you aware of that fact is something you want to know. This is release candidates. This is not go live code for Microsoft. Things are in a flux. It's something you need to just be aware of. And that's not necessarily bad, because one of the things we're going to do is you're going to be joining a community. Open source is a lot about community, and so you're going to want to be part of that community now. Now the first demo is a hello web. If I could type, I'll show it to you. So there are the files there. There's a project.json file. I want to show you what that is. This is the new world order, so to speak, when it comes to project dependencies. And as you can see there, it uses IIS integration, and it uses Kestrel. And maybe you can't see that so well. So let me see if I can bump up my font size a little bit here. See if that's a little better. Just keep in mind that Project JSON, you're going to learn to love Project JSON. And so, having said that, .NET Store is going to pull down my dependencies, and it bundles them up. And you can see this one compared to the one previously was a few lines. This is a little bit more because it's web. And then if I do .NET Run, I can run this code. Now to view it, I have to share a different screen set, folks. Okay. So to view it, I'm going to go to here. Now that IP address is related to the CDK. That's where that came from. So there's the hello world running in the .NET in Linux. And you can see here the application's running, Control-C to shut down. Notice this right here, I want to point this out, the IP address. You have to change that in your code. It defaults to localhost. If you do that, you're not going to see anything because it's going to stay inside of the Red Hat virtual machine, and you're not going to see it outside. That kind of like exposes it to the world. So that's your basic web. It's just a real simple. If I do a program, see it. Interesting thing about this, I also want to point out, yesterday I was working on this. It worked fine. I went to dinner. I came back and it didn't work. This is the nature of open source software in its infancy. The statement right here used to be use IIS, and that was fine. When I got back, it broke. I did some research on GitHub, found out it was use IIS integration now. So again, there's something that you want to keep in mind when you're working on this. Things can change, things can break. It's not something to be upset about or get discouraged. It's a chance for you to learn more and really dive into things. So now that's just simple hello web, but we can do better. We can do an MVC app. And this is going to be a very basic one. Notice I just did run because it was previously I did a restore and build, and it has a hierarchy that it goes through. It'll figure out if it has different dependencies. It'll say, hey, the dependencies have changed, let me pull them down. If your source code has changed, it'll say, hey, your source code has changed, let's compile. But if nothing has, it just goes ahead and runs. Now if I go to this again, the way this MVC works is if I type in a comment, there you go. There's your, we've all seen that. This is a basic MVC that just proves to you that MVC is working. We'll see a little bit better example later. And again, Control C, I'm out of that. Now let's look at a RESTful service. The nice thing about the RESTful service is now it's the same, you're going to use the same code basically as MVC. It makes it a lot easier. If you've done any work with Ruby on Rails, as you know, you can write a Ruby application and you can just append .json to the end of your URL and you get JSON back because it's the same engine underneath. That's how this is now. So if I do a .NET restore, as opposed to what we did earlier, now we're getting even more dependencies down. I wanted you to see, sometimes this can get pretty massive. 24 packages downloaded. .NET. I can do a build if I want. I'll just do a run. You can just do a build, obviously, without running. Okay, she's fired up now. And this is the API one, so the URL is api.products, and I get a list. And if you notice in the background, you'll see everything scrolling by. So if I do that again, and then I can pick a particular product, I do number 3. So that's MVC, and again, there's no smoke and mirrors here. This is all running in a Red Hat Linux machine. Control C out. Now the next thing I want to point out or show you is the enterprise framework. I did this in memory, and this is a real simple application that basically it's going to take the get from your command, from your URL, and store it in memory and then bring it back up as a list onto the screen. So the best way to show you that is to run it. Again, I will do a restore just for purposes of demonstration. But when you do a restore like this, it pulls the information down and stores it in a project lock JSON file, and it compares that every time you do a run to see if they're the same. There is a way to override that so that it doesn't compare. You'll notice some of the things it'll do. Detected package downgrade. It'll figure out if you need to downgrade. It'll also, you're going to want to look at and learn about the way the project.json works. And there's going to be a lot more of that on our GitHub and repo and on blog posts and articles, etc. But when it comes to versioning, if you ask for example, version 1 and only version 3 is available, you will get version 3. And that's something to be aware of, because it uses a little intelligence to figure out what you want. It's not always what you want, what you think you're going to get. And there's a whole art to like debugging and diagnosing problems with the project.json. Now, here's the in-memory enterprise framework. You can see it's compiling it because some of the inputs were older. The code has obviously been changed. 6 warnings. Now this is the one where if I type in a message, I'm going to take it, store it, and bring it back to the screen, just to show you that it's using enterprise. So if I do foo, and then if I do bar, There you go, foo and bar, and then I can just continue like that. So that is the enterprise framework in memory. It does work. If I look at this. Oh, by the way, if you're a Windows developer and you have zero experience with Linux, don't fear. On our website, redhatloves.net, there's a Linux cheat sheet, and that'll help you along. Look at values. There's the controller. That's all it takes for that application. Notice I'm using, notice right here, right? Some link. Take 10, it's taking the top 10, listing them, creating them as a list, and then just sends it back to the view, which is basically just outputs the list. So showing you that's an easy one. Now let's back up here. Let's look at this one called speaker. This is a full entity framework, MVC, and with the full CRUD experience. So to create, use, update, delete. I've decided that I want to do a little demonstration. I do some public speaking as part of my responsibility at work, so I thought it'd be kind of neat if you had a website that would let you keep track of where you submit proposals to speak at conferences. So I called it Speaker, and it should look very familiar. Just basically tweak the out-of-box experience you get from Microsoft. So now if I click on my submissions, right, there's none, but I can create a new one. So let's go to All Things Open 2016, and I'll speak on .NET on Linux. I can create it, and I'm back to my list. Now again, this is all in Linux. This is running on Red Hat. There's no smoke and mirrors. There's nothing here to deceive you or trick you. This is just how it works. And there's a list. I can get details on one. I can edit it. Just to get All Things Open. And it goes back to the list. That's fine. I can delete one. So there's your create, read, update, delete. And you probably saw in the background that because I'm in debug mode, everything's scrolling by. And you can. This is a source of great information if you want to search back through here and see what it's doing. As I was preparing this, I had things that didn't work. I started going back through here and found some warning errors, things that actually they were errors, but it was nice enough not to crash, and it was explaining why things weren't working. So there's a whole source of a wealth of information there to help you. So that's basically everything you want to do in .NET in a nutshell. I want to show you this in controllers. I have a submissions controller. Go into that. I want to show you. You download this. You're going to get this from GitHub. If you do get the Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the version you can get for free, you may need to do a git install git. But once you do that, you're going to get the code off of. You're going to clone it off of GitHub. But this. Anyway, this commented outline to show you that you can use you can use expressions to limit it to 3. So go ahead when you pull that down and do that to prove that works, and then you can start playing around with experimenting with your own. We used in-memory database because at the time we were going to use SQLite. I found a defect and it didn't work. That may have changed. Again, the nature of all this, and in fact, one of the things we will do in the very near future is have the demo running with SQLite. So now, what else is left? This is to run this in Docker. And I have a Docker examples. And all you have to do that is add a Docker file. Now I will say that we have created ahead of time this Docker image called .NET Base. If you're not familiar with Docker, it's kind of like a real tiny VM that spins up very quickly. That's way oversimplifying it, but you can set up images and they're ready to go and then they just run. So when I run this container, what you see in front of you there that's already been executed, so to speak. It's already been packaged into the image and ready to fire off. That's the only thing I need to change. So now if I do a Docker run, and I'll detach it so it runs by itself, and it exposes port 5000, so I'll take that 5000 and I'll just map it to 5000. You can have the port inside the container be different than what is exposed, and you can have it generate them automatically. That's okay. Name, I'll just call it speaker. I don't have to name it. It'll give it a name if I don't. And this. And if I did everything right, this should launch there. That quickly, it launched. That's what you just saw is the beauty of Docker and microservices. Now, if I go into here and refresh this, I will see, well, I will see that I broke it. And there it is. So it took what, 30 seconds to start. Now this is not the same. This is the same code that you saw before, but this is running in Docker. Docker inside of Red Hat Linux. Again, it's the same. After this, it's going to all be the same. And you're not seeing anything from before because, again, this is an in-memory database. So that's running in Docker. If I do a Docker PS, you'll see it right there, the very first one, speaker running, created 53 seconds ago. So some things you need to remember. Things are happening quickly and it might break your code. My example, the use IIS became use IIS integration in the time it took me to eat a burger, basically. You are already using open source. I mean, you are. If you're a web developer, you're using jQuery, right? You're using Angular. If you're writing backend stuff, you're using Newtonsoft, probably, for JSON. There are some other really great tools available out there we didn't dive into, but there's one called Yeoman, there's one called Autorest. They'll generate some code for you. They're great. There's a Swagger, which Autorest uses. It's a kind of a standard way you define your APIs. And you can use Swagger to document your APIs. So that's basically the demo in a nutshell. What's coming very soon, in the next few days, this speaker demo will be updated to use SQLite, and I'm sure I'll add some more fields to the screen just to make it more fun. There will be some articles explaining the project.json file, which is, if you're going to have a problem, that's where it's going to be, with troubleshooting tips and how to diagnose it. There's going to be a more thorough example of Docker and microservices using .NET. There will be some articles just dealing with the overall what's going on in this space. And then finally, there will be some examples using IDEs. There will be one with Visual Studio, an example using Visual Studio, a Visual Code, and hopefully JetBrains' new Rider. So we're going to give you a lot of options and show you what you can do. And I remind you that the website is redhatloves.net, where you can get a cheat sheet, and you can also download your own version of RHEL. And with that, Burr, I'll turn it back over to you. Can't hear you, Burr.
It helps to unmute. Are we unmuted now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Right, so if you'd exit screen sharing, and actually I want to share and show you guys a few more things. And
okay, bear with me, folks. I'm having a little difficulty on where the screen sharing. There we go. You got it?
Fantastic. And I can share, and that'll drop you out. Where's the button? Okay. Okay, we've been answering a lot of questions on Twitter. We didn't have any actually come in through the Q&A mechanism associated with the Google Hangout, Google On Air, but we had several come in on Twitter, some which I think were notable and should be discussed as a whole. One is, was there any kernel work that was done? And the answer to that, as far as I know and as far as Red Hat has known, is no. We're running all this on RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.2, the standard stock Red Hat Enterprise Linux that everybody's been using. And so we have not been supporting that, or not had any kind of kernel updates from that perspective. It is the standard stuff. So it should be all good to go once we actually have the packages available to you and in the appropriate yum repos. So when I said yum install -y and the rh.NET Core, that is not yet available to you when it comes to the specific repos. Those are not yet public. If in fact you have an existing Red Hat Enterprise Linux installation that you really want to add this to, like today, what I'd encourage you to do is you need to go to my GitHub repo or Don's, and we'll give you these URLs more specifically. But we actually have a tar file, in my case, listed here, and you just untar that and then do the yum installs on that as an example. And that'll give you a .NET environment, and then you SCL enable from there. And to show you Don's, I'll just bring up that one on GitHub here. And you can specifically see .NET on Linux. And again, in his Docker examples, he has the .NET-based one as well, and that's the same tar file. So that's the specific version that we are using. And if I go back over here, all right, this is my VS Code, by the way. I got it working. So that's VS Code. And you can see there's a C# extension that's not yet installed on this VM. I can install that, but I'll do that later. But this is where you would actually make your code changes if you want to. And if I go back to the terminal, let me switch back to terminal over here. Terminal. Come on, switch. Let me hit the right button. There we go. This is, again, if you type .NET -version or .NET-help, you will see the specific version we are using. So ours is a few days older. We got to a nice stable version that we liked from the nightly builds, and we've stuck with that to make sure our demonstrations were all ready to run today. So just keep that in mind. The version you will receive from us officially as the real beta will be a little bit updated from this one. It should probably still be in the 2000 range, so you see 2277, but it will be a little bit a newer version. And again, that basic pattern, .NET New, .NET Restore, .NET Run, that is the pattern you should be familiar with. And I've not yet .NET Restored that guy, so .NET Restore. And basically, NuGet delivers the packages that you might need. Now, keep in mind that we're going to specifically give you the ASP.NET packages as well as EF packages that we have certified and made work as a full application stack. So your whole web application stack, we will pre-package, if you will, and pre-certify that stack and give you the right RPM specifically for those guys. You won't have to pull them from NuGet as we are doing here, but for any other framework that you want, anything else from the NuGet universe, you will want to use that .NET Restore, and as Don mentioned, the package.json and the package.json identifying all the, or project.json, I should say, identifying the dependencies that you have. You can see in this case it's just basic .NET Core.
I have a question. If a user is developing on this and at one point just has everything all messed up, because it's in VirtualBox, they can restore back to the starting point and start over. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. The images we provided today, a HyperV image and a VirtualBox image, and I'll bring up this slide here so you can see what the URLs are for that. I tweeted them out also. But the HyperV image here and the VirtualBox image, you can go back, you just keep a copy of those guys and go back to them, right? You can destroy everything, throw it away, and go back to them. I do that often when it comes to my virtual machines. So the VirtualBox image is specifically an OVA, and with OVA, right, you can import it either into VMware or VirtualBox. That's what I really love about that one. And the HyperV image is, of course, a HyperV image in the standard HyperV way. But you just do an import on that guy, and then you're off and running again, right? So I will burn down a VM on a regular basis. That's a very good question.
I have another question too. What's in it for a .NET developer?
What's in it for a .NET developer?
Yeah.
And that's a very good question, Don, and maybe we should discuss that. So when it comes to a .NET developer, in my case, I was a .NET developer a long time ago, right? So I'm not current, if you will, and Don, you're much more current than I am. But what I really appreciate is this opens up the ecosystem to those individuals. So they'll be able to go out and actually have a vastly more vibrant ecosystem than ever before. If you're a traditional .NET developer, you kind of waited for Microsoft to give you the features that you needed. Right? So you could embrace AngularJS, but in many cases you kind of waited for Microsoft to embrace AngularJS as an example. You could have embraced Grunt, Bower, or Gulp, or any of those cool tools coming out of the Node.js ecosystem, but you would have waited for Microsoft to embrace those same things. In this new world, this new open source world, as soon as any innovation happens in the ecosystem, you can take advantage of it instantly and immediately, and that's really the big value of being in this open source world. And now you can run it on Linux. and on Linux is going to be more performant over time, right? So it's going to be actually a faster runtime, a smaller, skinnier, thinner runtime, and you have the full Docker Linux container technology as well to run with. As I mentioned earlier, I have my Linux containers running here, specifically in this guy, right? Docker images, and I can include things like running this little hello web, right? So just as you showed earlier, I can run Docker -it and then .NET hello web, right? And actually, and I got to expose the right port. So just as you did there earlier. So that concept, right, is available to you because of the innovation coming out of the Linux ecosystem, the open source ecosystem. And so this will push the whole industry forward, and it will certainly push .NET forward for all .NET developers. So I think it is getting new superpowers. That's how I feel about it.
Right, I agree. It's almost like you're getting invited to a party that's been going on next door. The other thing is a lot of companies have an investment in Linux, and they want to keep using it, and they want to attract other developers. And if you're a C# developer now, it's a two-way street. Companies have a larger pool from which to gather developers, and developers have a larger pool to which to apply their talents. I think it's a great opportunity for companies that say we want to run a Linux stack from top to bottom, and maybe we're doing microservices, and maybe we have a team over here of maybe there was a merge or an acquisition, or they just found some really sharp C# developers, no pun intended, and says here's a team, here's 4 people that can do this part of our microservice, and it's C#. It's okay now. We don't have to worry about running on a Microsoft. It'll just run in .NET. And the Node people are over here, and the Python people are back here, and we can all just, cats and dogs living together, so to speak. It just makes the whole world smaller and better. Another human touch of what I like about it is, again, I mentioned, is the sense of community. And if you're coming to this from the Windows world and have done nothing in open source, and that's fine, I was there 3 years ago, the whole sense of community is so different. It opens up so many avenues of relationships with people, and what comes out of that is the ability to help each other, to feed off each other. If you're a startup and there's 2 of you, and now you and your C# developers, you say, well, now we can do this. We don't need to invest a ton of money to get started. And then you have this community you can run ideas by. I think there's a lot for open source. I think Microsoft joining it is just going to make the party that much more fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I just actually saw a question that came in over Twitter. People wanted to know where the sample apps were, the demo apps, and certainly we appreciate that. So by default, the example applications do not ship with the .NET runtime. They are actually at Don's repo right now. We put everything out on GitHub at Don Schenk and .NET on Linux. That's where you'll find all the demonstrations that he and I have been running, as well as additional documentation to support your effort, including that .NET the .NET Linux, sorry, the Docker base image that we show you how to craft, so you have .NET running in a Docker image. So all that's out there at Don's repo. Just want to call that out.
There's also a question here, Bro, that came in. Can you make a program with .NET to run your backup software? I guess like anything you could. I don't know how you'd have to somehow shell out. I don't know the technical details offhand. Of course you could. Whether you should, that's another argument, but basically if you can do it in any language, you'll be able to do it in .NET. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of any specific limitation at this point based on the new architecture. And that's actually one thing that's fairly unique about this new .NET DOT command line tool, right? That you can run everything from the command line, and you can also do the publish, which will bundle your.
Right.
We don't have a demo of publish today, but you publish and bundle everything into a single assembly, right, or a single package, and then you can deploy that whole thing as one single unit. So with the CLI command line tool, with Hello World that you saw there earlier, that's just like any other command line tool, whether it be from Nodeland or Pythonland or Javaland or whatever. Mostly Python and Node.js, and I think about it, is where those patterns come from. So you could use those as a way to basically build any kind of application. It doesn't have to be a visible, visual web application stack like we were showing you with the ASP.NET and Entity Framework.
Right.
Okay, and yep, I'm just checking on Twitter to see if there are any other questions that have come in. We've certainly seen a number of them. But there has been a lot to show you today, and we probably went through it rather fast. I know, Don, you're demoing pretty fast there. But was there any specific point that you want to recap, make sure that you explicitly state it again as far as how the code is organized, whether that be the project JSON file or the NuGet.config, or how any of that magic comes together?
Right, those two things. The NuGet.config, which theoretically you would never have to touch, but you may. But the project.json file is really where, again, you're going to spend your time and you're going to have your problems and your confusion. And I know this, I've got the bleeding knuckles from doing it. And that is something that is going to be covered in the GitHub repo in FAQs, starting this afternoon. It is really a challenge. I've reached out to some folks at Microsoft, getting some advice from them. But once we all get it, it's going to be great, and we're going to work together, and it's a great learning experience. When you have your project.json, and you do a restore, and you go back and read everything that came down, things start to really click in your head. Before, you would browse for DLL and add it as a reference. Now, when you're using project packages like this, it starts to make more sense. It seems to be more real to me. I don't know why that is. And also, again, working in other languages, you have Node Project Manager. You have you have the Ruby one, which is escaping me right now. But you have project managers for every other language, so it follows that model. And if you become a polyglot, slide over to another language, you've got the lingo and understanding of that. But yeah, that project.json, again, I cannot stress enough that look, you're a C# developer, you know how to write code. It's the project management of it that's going to be the challenge, not project large scale. I mean, the small project that is your code. And I'm sure that Microsoft is going to come out with some tools to make it a lot easier. I don't know that, but I'm confident they will. But it's a brave new world, and it's a lot of fun, and there's a certain thrill about typing .NET run at the command line and watching a program run in Linux. I never get tired of it.
Huh. And actually, I should still be sharing. Is it sharing on your end?
Yes, I see it.
All right, fantastic. Well, let me show you this, because to kind of make the point of what Don's talking about here, I'll just pull up the examples he was showing earlier. If you look here at speaker as a good example, and the package.json here, there's very specific dependencies that have to get pulled in, and then the NuGet config.
And the project.json is the monster.
Oh, the project.json. Okay, yeah, let me get the right one. And then the NuGet config, you can see right here. And one thing about NuGet config at this moment, let me see if I can get this to be a little bit bigger. It is pulling from this place called myget. Just bear that in mind. That's because we're using nightly builds. We're using myget, which is where the nightly builds are. You won't do that when you're kind of for real doing this with great anger and from a development perspective. That item should be gone, and you should just be pulling stuff directly from NuGet as an example. But just keep in mind that if you're living in this current world as of April 12th, 2016, and you're using nightly builds as we are today, you'll probably deal with myget and your NuGet config.
Because this is open source, if an enterprise decided that they wanted to have their own, for some reason, versions of these packages, you can have your NuGet feed be a local, you can host it yourself. I'm sure there will be specific instances where that will be the case. It's very flexible.
Yep. So I just want to call that out one more time, because it's definitely one of those things that'll get you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we'll pull up this slide. We weren't intending to keep everybody here for the full 2 hours. We just budgeted that amount of time because it depends on the number of questions we receive and the kind of craziness you guys might want to see us dig into. And I'll double check Twitter one more time to see if we have any other traffic there. But just to kind of show you the slide where you can go get more information, specifically around downloading the HyperV or VirtualBox image you saw me demonstrate there. So again, you can take that VM, load it up. You'll want to get subscribed to developers.redhat.com, and then that will give you access to the subscription manager, and then you can do full yum updates and everything else on that image. But at that point, you have a working .NET to try, running Hello World as you saw us do here. But don't forget about Don's .NET on Linux repo. That's where you want to find the actual example applications. You just do a git clone on that guy, and you're off and running. And you should be able to walk through the Docker examples that are there, as well as the standard .NET run examples that are there, the native examples, if you will. and then you can actually have those running right now today if you want to install this technology.
And if you go to my repo, if there's any questions at all, just create an issue, and I'll be right on it.
Okay. Well, I'm looking to see if there are any more questions in the mix before we kind of call this a wrap. It looks like we are okay from a question standpoint, but just bear in mind we will be specifically providing more content. If you have to remember any single URL, it's redhatloves.net. Just keep coming there. It'll redirect the appropriate pages at our overall website, which is developers.redhat.com, and from that point we'll give you the various .NET materials as they are. As soon as we know them, we will get the content documented and published and out to you guys so you can be exploring .NET on Linux for the very first time. We realize there's a lot of interest in that, and there's a lot of people who specifically would love to get their hands on it. So just keep that in mind, redhatloves.net, and we'll constantly be updating as we find out more information. We'll get that out to you guys as well. Okay, but at this point, I believe we have covered all of the questions that are out there. I don't see any more in the feed. One more just popped up. Let me double check.
I found one. Are there any plans on porting GTK and Mono Develop to this stack? That's a great question. I don't know of any, but it does open the possibility, right? I mean, so I'm out of curiosity, I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, I've not heard any plans either, but it would be interesting. But keep in mind, now that Mono has joined the .NET Foundation as part of the, they're a part of Xamarin, acquired by Microsoft, and everything is now MIT licensed and moved over to the .NET Foundation. And of course, a lot of Xamarin in general is just being open source. There could be a lot more interesting things coming down, right? We're just at the very beginning stages of this. 1.0 is not yet shipping per se. We're trying to get to what I'd call a solid beta, even though they're calling these things RCs. We're not quite to a beta quality product yet, and we hopefully will land at that point sometime in April.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me exit the sharing here. And again, if you need Don or I, just to flash the screen back up, you can find us on Twitter at burrsutter, at Don Shank, and burr at redhat.com, shank at redhat.com for our email addresses. Hopefully I got your correct email address there.
Yep.
And like I said, just keep following us, and we'll keep putting out the information as we find it out. Okay? Well, thank you guys very much for your time today. Again, questions, hit us anytime. We're available 24/7, it seems like, at this point. Right, Don?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. But if there's anything else, just hit us on Twitter. Thank you and have a good day.
Go Spurs, go.